Thank you. For the majority of us, there's something that we consume every day, something that we hardly think about before we take a sip of our favorite drink or take a bite out of our favorite snack. Sugar. Something so common today that it's hard to imagine a time when it was considered a luxury good. Something so valuable that it was often referred to as white gold. Sugar production historically was predominantly localized in Southeast Asia, but by the 16th century, Europe had uncovered the New World, and with it, a Pandora's box opened in terms of opportunities for production and trade. And at the heart of it, the tropical Caribbean for its sugar potential. And so Europe began its Caribbean island grab. Spain, France, Britain, the Netherlands all claimed their island territories. Widespread plantation agriculture was almost immediately implemented, and with it, of course, slavery was brought over. In fact, Britain imported roughly 4 million slaves just to work their island territories. By 1807, however, the British Empire declared slavery illegal, although the process didn't get phased out in the Caribbean until 1838. But at that time, it was clear that finding replacement labor would be an issue, because when slave emancipation did come, there was an exodus of slaves from the field. The work had immediately become associated with oppression and therefore undesirable as a means of employment. So the imperial powers needed replacement labor. But who could replace slave labor? The answer came on the other side of the globe, in Asia. Coolie is originally a Gujarati and Tamil term from India, meaning someone of manual labor. Historically in China and India, coolies were day laborers who often represented low economic standing. When slave emancipation came to the Caribbean, the British experimented by sending small groups of coolies to work their overseas plantations. Success. They didn't all die. So the British had found their replacement labor. But now remember, slavery was illegal. So there had to be some sort of compensation, and people had to be willing to go. And keeping in mind that there also needed to be a lot of them to counter the deficit of the lost slave labor. So recruitment stations were set up across Asia, particularly in China and India, to recruit workers for contract indentureship. High wages and easy work was falsely advertised. Now, for the Anglophone Caribbean, Indians would comprise the majority of those that went over to the Caribbean. And the reason for this was because for the encroaching poverty that was coming to village Indians during the mid-1800s, emigration posed a solution to that. Coolie labor from India was thus harvested. Workers were transported not only to the Americas and to the Caribbean, but to all around the globe. Essentially, Britain had traded in the slave trade for the coolie trade. And for the Caribbean, the coolie trade would become the second largest import of labor, second only to slavery. This intercolonial labor migration demonstrates the colonial power taking one vulnerable labor force and transplanting them from one territory to another colony to ensure a continuous mode of capital production. The term coolie had been reconstructed from its former historical meaning. Now coolie was synonymous with indentured labor. Individuals became identified as coolies through their indentureship. This identity construction was appropriated by the imperial ruling class, a group that had no association or relationship with the labeled coolie themselves. Most of the indentured had no understanding of the terms of their contract, that they could be sent to any of the colonies overseas where they were bound for 5 to 8 years, and that their meager earnings would incorporate not only cost of travel to the colonies, but, of course, upkeep and maintenance while working on the plantations. More importantly, however, the indentured were oblivious to the realities of their journey, the conditions they would be met with, and the cultural implications that their decision to indenture would have on the cultural reproduction of their own identity. We see how the conceptualization of race is constructed and reinforced not only temporally, but also spatially. perceived and actual barriers to communal open space entrenches beliefs regarding social placement. Indians, the coolies, they were transported in the cargo holding cells of ex-slave ships. Once on the colonies, they were forced and quarantined on the plantation, having little to no outside environment, interaction. They occupied the same space as former slaves, living and working in the same areas. From the time they had stepped foot on the transport vessels, their socialization had begun. Their social conditioning to become coolies, an indentured and subordinated race. Former slaves and the indentured held a shared experience of plantation work and the common awareness of their social, political, and economic inferiority to the whites. Not unique to the Caribbean, however, the British instituted an intricate system of racial classification to prevent interethnic unity among these two groups. The British used a system of distributed economic benefits and burdens to instill notions of colonial favoritism and class and racial favoritism between the groups. So the whites comfortably occupied the highest echelons of social standing, while tensions rose amongst the indentured and the former slaves to gain status and to climb the social ladder within the highest level of their racially constructed boundaries. The British noted that the Africans in the Caribbean had the good sense to convert from their primitive religion and become God-fearing people. The Caribbean coolies, however, didn't take so easily to religious conversion and actually had a more affirmative stance towards religious retention. Now, this would be a limiting factor to their assimilation and upward social mobility. This is because access to education and positions in civil government required conversion to Christianity. Remember, though, the indentured were taken from various places within India. India itself being a pluralist state. Hindus representing different hierarchies of the class system were now only forced to reside together, ignoring the traditionally strict systems of the caste spatial system, but also they lived in a society where all coolies held the same subordinated status. As a result of this, the caste system lost its value in Hindu indentured. And indeed, the caste system is seldom represented in contemporary, modern Caribbean Hinduism. Additionally important is the gendered reproduction of culture. Initially, women were not allowed to indenture. They were seen as distractions and less productive. However, it was feared that men would become hostile and unruly without women. So it became mandated that there be a 4-to-10 ratio, 4 women to every 10 men on the ships before they left. This gender disparity, amongst other things, led to excessive levels of sexual and physical violence of the indentured women. We see how this inherited set of social relations manifests today, not only with the high levels of domestic violence of Indo-Caribbean women, but also with the enduring patriarchal ideology, which stretches as far as oppressive state policies towards women in the Caribbean and goes as personal as creating clear and defined gender roles in the family and household. Racialization was propagated through socialization and class consciousness, internalizing the norms and values of a society and accepting them as valid. Racialization of not only the slaves, but also the coolie, allowed the colonists to exercise power and to exercise hegemonic control over their imported Caribbean population. The indentured were cut off from their relationship with India, one, because of the sheer distance, the colonies being the farthest away from India. Secondly, because of the terms of their contract, barely any indentured returned to India once their contracts expired. The Caribbean coolie represents this reshaped identity, formed out of exiled imaginative notions of the homeland and formed out of the experience of racialized indentureship. Today, coolie is a slang epithet in the West Indies associated with someone of East Indian descent. To many, coolie is a racial slur. It evokes emotions for generations of people who endured when exploitation, privation, and hardship were their reality. But to people like linguist and poet Kal Torabali, the coolie represents the evolution of an identity, the evolution of an identity to become part and parcel of not only the history, but to enrich the lands in which you've settled. Kuli, which began denoting an economic status, became to describe a human situation. Thank you.